So, after that very brief introduction to a little bit of Eastern thought, namely Buddhism, we can return to this dilemma now. We can think about whether it's possible to solve the problem of evil using Eastern thought. But even our very brief survey of what Eastern thought, is like, shows that there is a vast difference between Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy. I mean, it's so vast a chasm that I actually have this analogy that I like to use because I think it's accurate. So think about, the old stories of Dracula and the werewolf. And I'm talking about like the classic ones, right? Like I don't know anything about Twilight, but not that. In the old story, Dracula, I mean, he did live for a very, very long time before he was eventually brought down. And he liked to live for that long time. And as far as he was concerned, he was going to continue to live indefinitely, sucking on people's blood to continue to live. And that was the whole idea behind Dracula. That's what he did. That was his motivation. He wanted to stay alive. The werewolf is different. Now, the werewolf saw being a werewolf as a curse. He didn't like being a werewolf. He dreaded nights with full moons. He would, put himself in a cage so that he wouldn't be able to hurt anyone when he was in his wolf mode. So for the werewolf, this is not a good thing. His condition is not good. And he was ultimately, one hesitates to say thankful when he was killed by the huntsman, but he was happy to get rid of the curse, And so these two monsters, at least to me, I mean, this is an analogy that I've checked with some people and they say, yeah, that's accurate. It is a very Garcia analogy, but still, it's an accurate analogy in that it seems to me Western monotheistic religions like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they're like Dracula. I mean, the payoff for those religions is to live forever, and people want to go to heaven. That's like the whole idea. However, for Eastern religions, and we only covered one, sure, but you can say similar things about Hinduism. The idea is actually not salvation, but some kind of annihilation. I mean, the goal is to get free from the endless cycle of rebirth on one way of looking at it, or be free from the illusion that there is a self, right? So one is all about living forever, and the other one is about not existing anymore. I mean, so there is a massive chasm between these approaches to religion. It almost stretches the word religion, to its breaking point. I mean, they really do seem like different things here. So all that to say, it seems really unlikely that Eastern thought can really be integrated into Western thought. That's like the first thing I want to say. But some people still try, and even though it baffles me, I'm going to go with it anyways. Why not? So, first of all, Eastern philosophy, Buddhism in particular, we're covering Buddhism here. It does have things to say on unnecessary suffering, so I'll go ahead and take this from the slides. Humans are full of desire and hence attached to material objects. This leads to war, fighting, greediness, stealing, etc. With liberation, we will be free of desire. Hence, human wickedness will stop. So the Buddhists definitely do see a lot of unnecessary suffering in the world, and they do have a solution to that, and it comes through liberation, right? Follow the Eightfold Path. And it almost seems like they're right. That would work if everyone was an enlightened Buddhist. Having said that, this is not at all the problem of evil. I mean, the problem of evil is reconciling the existence of an all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing deity with unnecessary suffering. not just how to get rid of unnecessary suffering. So even though the Buddhists do have something to say about unnecessary suffering, it's not really what we're looking for in this class if you want to solve the problem of evil. So let me just kind of title it this way: Problem with using Eastern thought to solve the problem of evil. Let me make the points in the following way, and then I'll expand on these from the slides. Buddhism is a non-theistic religion. They do not have a God. It seems then that the problem of evil would never arise for them in the first place. So, what do we mean by this? Well, first of all, the Buddha never said he was God, so they really don't have a God. And you can check my references for more information on that. But just think about this big mess we're in right now here on the screen. If there is no all-loving, all-knowing, all-powerful God, then none of this happens, essentially. I mean, look how central the problem of evil is to this whole, quagmire that we're in. If the Buddhists don't have a God of that sort, they don't really have to solve the problem of evil. And so, why would integrating Eastern thought into our framework help at all? That's not a problem that they have. They don't have the problem of evil like the Western tradition that we're looking at. So that's the first thing that I want to say. Basically, these are massively incompatible models. Western problems can't be solved with Eastern concepts because Western and Eastern philosophy is basically incompatible. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is this. Sure, fine. Let's pretend for a second that you could integrate these. I don't know how that would happen, but let's pretend for a second. Now, we have some problems in the Western conception of God, right? So we looked at the omnipotence paradox a long time ago. And just as a reminder, this is asking, basically it's suggesting that omnipotence as a trait is basically inconsistent. It doesn't even make sense. It's incoherent. So questions like, can God make a boulder so big that afterwards he can't push it? Or can God make beings such that afterwards he can't control them? All of these, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing. So if he can't make a boulder so big that he can't move it, then he's not all powerful because he can't make it. But if he can make a boulder so big that he can't move it, then he's still not all powerful because he can't move it, right? So these are supposed to show that omnipotence itself seems like an incoherent concept. Now let's just kind of, let's pretend we're integrating Eastern thought into our Western, framework, and let's just make an Eastern paradox. Why not? I mean, even if we were to get these concepts, Eastern concepts, into the Western framework, what I'm trying to suggest here is it wouldn't help. So here's what I'm calling the yin-yang paradox, and I'll just take this from the slides. Can God create moral goodness without moral wrongness? Good without evil? Pleasure without pain? If he can't, then he's not all powerful. If he can, then he's not all loving, since he didn't. Well, I mean, this is just the flip side. I mean, if you really want to integrate East and West, this is essentially the omnipotence paradox with the yin-yang concept of, good and evil, light and dark, that kind of thing. Could God not have done so? I mean, it just seems like the yin-yang framework itself is incompatible with omnipotence. And it just really doesn't... It just really leaves you with more questions than answers, as I'll make even clearer in a second. Let's think of the concept of karma now. Is that going to help? No. Theists sometimes claim that the notion of karma helps solve the problem of evil, but why should we believe the law of karma exists? If suffering is a result of karma, why doesn't God ameliorate it, since God is omnipotent? I mean, I'm not sure how people thought karma was actually going to help here. And I get it year after year. People say, well, you can't have good without evil, or people suffer because it's karma. And then I say, well, where does karma fit in with God? Did God make karma? Is karma co-equal with God? Is one subordinate to the other? Does God have to abide by karma? Couldn't God have just made everything without karma? I mean, the idea here is twofold. It's not clear that Eastern thought can integrate with Western thought. Moreover, even if it could, we'd still have way, way, way more questions than answers. And that is how I want to wrap that little thing up. In short, for the theist, Eastern thought offers more questions than answers. Well, I wish that were it for our little lesson on Buddhism. It is, however, my custom to not just look at one side of things, but to question everything. And you might imagine that, Buddhism seems really interesting and really cool and has some cool ideas to it. And people in general are really open to Buddhism when I talk about it. I mean, they like this lesson. But I can't in all honesty, not look at the flip side, try to argue against Buddhism or try to find some problems in it. So let me just add this little thing. That's not all, folks, okay? Let's look at one more little thing here. So in his 2006, The Happiness Hypothesis, Jonathan Haidt surveys the various hypotheses on how to achieve happiness passed down to us by the ancients and puts them through an empirical filter to see which ones are true. In Chapter 5, he discusses Buddhism and the Eightfold Path. By the way, this is a great book if you get a chance to read it. And I should mention that in Chapter 5, he not only discusses Buddhism, but also the ideas of a person named Epictetus. We never covered him, but so you'll see his name in these quotes. So let me take one little point here that by Chapter 5 he's already made clear, but I have to give you some quick pointers on positive psychology. So Jonathan Haidt cites Seligman, and that's this book right here. So let's look at what his view is real quick, and then we'll go back to Haidt. Okay, according to Seligman, 2004, H equals S plus C plus V. Right, so that probably doesn't mean anything to you. Here's what that means. The level of happiness that you actually experience, H, is determined by your biological set point, S, plus the conditions of your life, C, plus the volunteer activities that you do. So that equation, what that means is your happiness level is basically a combination of these three factors. Everyone has a set point of happiness, and by now I'm sure you've kind of noticed this in your life. Some people just have a more cheery disposition than others. I mean, some people, kind of can bounce back from adversity pretty quickly, and they generally remain positive. Other people can't do that, and not to say anything bad or good about either one. That just is the way we are. So I know some people like to deny that we are. There's individual variation, but there is. Happiness is an example of that. Some of us are happier, have a happier set point than others. So that's S. There's also the conditions of your life, C. So no matter what your biological set point is, if you're born into destitute poverty, you're not going to be that happy, right? So that's C, and that's obviously a factor in overall happiness. And there is also V. So V is all those things that you choose to do. And I might add here that, and multiple people say this, but you can refer to Chapter 5 of Jonathan Haidt's book. There are a ton of things that you can do to make yourself happier, and a lot of us don't want to do them. One of them, by the way, is mindfulness meditation, which is relevant here on a lesson on Buddhism. So meditation has sort of shocking benefits, from improved memory, improved focus, kind of an ability to live in the moment. I mean, just, if someone were to tell you that all these things, like if you were to take a pill and it would give you all these things, you would, without a doubt, take the pill. I would certainly take the pill. However, I don't meditate, and it's because it's a lot of work. But in any case, there are, it just seems, some voluntary activities that really do make you happier. And all those three factors, S, C, and V, together determine your overall happiness level. Okay, so with that little primer on Seligman's work in positive psychology, let's go back to Jonathan Haidt. Let me take this from the slides. We have to give Buddha and Epictetus credit for B, because Buddha prescribed the Eightfold Noble Path, including meditation and mindfulness, and Epictetus urged methods of thought to cultivate indifference, apatheia, to externals. So I just mentioned this. I didn't talk about Epictetus, but obviously meditation can improve your level of happiness. So Buddha does get some credit for V. However, so to test the wisdom of the sages properly, we must examine this hypothesis. If there are many conditions C that matter, and if there are a variety of voluntary activities beyond those aimed at non-attachment, then the happiness hypothesis of Buddha and Epictetus is wrong, and people would be poorly advised simply to look within. So if the model from positive psychology is correct, and your overall happiness is your S plus your C plus your V, and the Buddha only mentioned a little bit of V, right? So if it turns out there are other factors in happiness that the Buddha didn't mention, well, then the Buddha's overall model, although it's partially correct, is in general not completely correct. It has some parts that are wrong. That's what Haidt is saying here in a nutshell. It turns out that there are various conditions C and voluntary actions V that do go beyond non-attachment, which do add to the total level of happiness H. For example, steering clear of constant traffic noise, less stressful commutes, avoiding situations that make you feel a lack of control, etc. He gives many, many other ones. So Buddha, of course, recommended meditation as one of your voluntary actions, but Haidt and, of course, the proponents of positive psychology in general are saying there's actually many more things you can do besides just that. I mean, I mentioned 3 of these here because these are, well, they can really negatively affect your overall happiness level. I mean, if you have to live somewhere where you constantly hear traffic noise, that is very anxiety-inducing, basically. If you have a stressful commute, that you literally measurable difference in happiness when you move closer to work, right? So or school or whatever. So long commutes, a lot of traffic noise where you live, these things are bad for your happiness level. And of course, the Buddha didn't mention any of them. Even if we, obviously there weren't cars then, but even if we were to, modulate it or convert it to like the ancient equivalent, he still didn't mention these things, at least not explicitly. Also, avoiding situations where you feel a lack of control. I mean, this is good advice. You shouldn't put yourself in situations where you feel a lack of control. I mean, again, you tend to give up more easily. You also tend to kind of, there's less locomotion. You're not moving around as much because you just feel like nothing you do really has an effect. So there's all these things that the Buddha didn't mention that do have an effect on your overall happiness level. So Jonathan Haidt, with all this, concludes, well, Buddhism does get some things right, but in general, it doesn't have the whole happiness hypothesis accurate, right? So there's more things than what Buddhism teaches. And that's, I want to give a fair assessment of every single view that we're covering. And so I have to add that, even though it seems like meditation is great, and I actually recommend that you do it, not that I do it, but I recommend you do it. it's not like it's a complete theory, right? So it's important to point things out like that. Let me close with the way Jonathan Haidt closes his little section on Buddhism. Let me read this quote. The life of calm, non-striving advocated by Buddha is designed to avoid passion, and a life without passion is not a human life. Yes, attachments bring pain, but they also bring our greatest joys. So it really is the case that if you're completely detached, sure, you will be satisfied in the Buddhist sense. But our attachments are also what, really bring meaning to some of our lives. And so what would a life be without love of music, love of your romantic partner, love of dance, whatever you're into? It seems like our attachments are kind of what define us. So that's what Haidt is bringing up here. And I tend to agree. It seems like that's a good point. Well, that is all for dilemma number 10. It's not clear that Buddhism or Eastern thought can help with the problem of evil. While we're at it, let's go ahead and close up dilemma number 9 here. Can a computer be conscious? As we saw in the last lesson, it looks pretty bad. Of course, the dualists have a ton of problems. They have to try to describe how the soul interacts with the body, and there's all kinds of ridiculous propositions, and they all seem really bad. Having said that, the materialist camp is also, mired in debate. And they can't make up their minds about what mental states are, what mental processes are, and how to define intelligence. And it's not looking great on that camp either. There will be progress, hopefully, made soon. But as of now, it seems like we can't answer this question. So let me close here with a quote by David Deutsch. Now, I actually don't agree with a ton of what David Deutsch says. I kind of think some of his views are a little crazy, but I do agree with this. I don't think artificial intelligence will be achieved until philosophical progress is made in understanding what consciousness is. We couldn't make artificial life without the concept of a replicator, and we don't have the equivalent concept yet for consciousness. You can't program what you can't specify. I think that is a great point. And, well, it just seems like it's hard to tell what's going to happen in this front. Now, it doesn't matter, by the way, as I hopefully made the case in Turing's test, the lesson Turing's test. It doesn't really matter whether machines are capable of thought. AI is still going to be extremely disruptive, and we should start preparing for that yesterday. And so, we're back to the board. We had 10 dilemmas total. We took care of 10 and 9 right now, although maybe the answers aren't satisfactory to you. That's about as far as we can take it here. And so that leaves us with the first 8. These 8 dilemmas, it's time to take care of them. It's time to wind the clock back and see if we can't solve this little pickle that we're in.